to another episode of Contemplating Resonance. I'm your host, Matt Stine, and I'm so glad that you're here with us today. If you've been listening this season, we've been diving into stories of religious trauma across the board, really exploring how does that shape the lives of our guests, ways that they've found to heal, and also ways that they have found to help others heal. So we will spend a little time getting to know our guest, and then we'll dive into the topic at hand. But before doing that, I want to go ahead and introduce my guest. So today we are joined by Kandi Zeller, a queer, witchy, disabled, and ex-evangelical writer and editor who works at the intersections of spirituality, creativity, and justice. Kandi, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me. It's an honor to be here.
Awesome. Well, I've been stoked for this conversation for a while because I feel like I've known you for a little while, but it's only been through text exchange. So it's always nice to be able to like have a face in a conversation. So I'm excited, as you can tell. So can you tell our listeners a little bit more about you, what you do, what drives you, anything you want to talk about?
Yeah. So like you said, I'm a writer and editor at the intersections of spirituality, creativity, and justice. And my background as a queer, witchy, disabled, and ex-evangelical person very much influences how that work fleshes out. I write a weekly newsletter on Substack called All the Threads, where I find random / creative spiritual practices for life after religious trauma. And I also work full-time as an editor for Microcosm Publishing, and I edit witchy books, sex ed content, activism books, DIY books, that kind of thing. And so it's very zines as well. So it's just, the two worlds mesh very, very well. I've also been working as a freelance developmental editor for the Strong-Willed Project with DL and Crispin Mayfield, which is working on exposing religious authoritarian parenting. And so it's been really fun to work on a project that is so directly correlated to how I grew up and the untangling that I've had to do. But yeah, so that's a little bit about what I'm working on at the moment.
That's cool. I did not know that. I mean, I probably saw it at some point, but I did not know that you were working with them on the Strong-Willed stuff.
Yeah, that has been an honor. It was kind of a whirlwind, and they reached out and they said, "Hey, we're looking for a dev editor, and we were wondering if you would do it." And it has been a joy to work on that project.
Something that interests me that I think you probably would have a perspective on, like, it seems like there are many different people all of a sudden, and not all of a sudden, but like all of a sudden becoming more visible, that are not only talking about a lot of the authors and influencers in the evangelical space, particularly around authoritarianism and intersections with parenting and discipline and all that. James Dobson, Focus on the Family. I'm seeing this coming from multiple directions all of a sudden. People finally feeling safe enough to expose, and sometimes with quite some rigor, what was going on. Mm-hmm. Why is that all of a sudden able to happen now?
I think you mentioned the feeling safe thing. And I think because of the internet, a lot of survivors, we have the ability to talk to each other and to hear that our experiences are not only valid, but were repeated on a mass scale. And I know I'm part of a lot of small Facebook groups of people who, like me, grew up this way, and just being able to talk to each other and being like, "Oh, you were experiencing this in another state, and I thought I was the only person in the world experiencing how scary this was." And so that aspect of feeling safe is where survivors are able to share their truth most effectively. And I also think there's a lot less stigma around therapy, and also a lot less stigma about like setting boundaries and going low or no contact as appropriate. It's really good to see. And again, that's the internet too, that the spread of really good information. a very positive thing about the internet. Obviously, the inverse can also be true. There can be misinformation, but a positive is that we can learn from each other, and especially the experiences that people have had.
Yeah. No, that makes a lot of sense. And I would expect with the more people who A, feel safe, and B, realize, hey, there are other people like me, I'm not alone, like that can give you a little bit of that extra, I don't know, courage, because it is courage, like
Yes.
to be able to say, okay, I'm not just going to say that I went through this. I'm going to yell loudly in public spaces about I went through this and other people went through this, and we need to talk about this stuff.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's a collective like mischief to it almost, because it is those groups, they're not all trauma dumping. There's also so much whimsy as people are becoming their true selves and being able to express themselves in ways that the communities we all grew up in would not have allowed, whether that's queerness or disability pride in my case, or maybe spirituality being different than evangelical, in my case more witchy. But yeah, it's just really beautiful to see the ways that people are resisting these things, not only by speaking their truth and talking about their trauma, but also stepping into the art of becoming themselves and expressing themselves in whatever ways make sense for them.
Yeah, there two things that come up out of that. One, I want to note that we weren't 10 minutes into the podcast before you used the word resist, because that's something that there are basically two things about your quote unquote brand that attracted me to your content and wanting to get to know you more. One was the fact that you talk about resistance more than anybody I've ever seen talk about it, but across so many different contexts of thinking about what does that word mean in that context and how do you do that in that context. So we're going to talk about that, I'm sure. And the other you just touched on, which is the whole whimsy goth situation. Like you are living your best life publicly right now, it feels like. And I love it. Like, I'm here for anybody doing that. I'm myself doing more and more of that because, again, going back to the safety conversation, like for years, there were things that I would have loved to do, but it's not safe to do that around other people. So we're just going to put that away.
Yeah, I know for me, in the days when I was very much still in fundamentalism, still very much in that sort of cult mindset, I know one of the things that pulled me out very, very slowly was seeing people living their best lives, living their authentic selves. And it wasn't even necessarily just like cult survivors or anything. It was just people on YouTube. And like, I loved seeing people express themselves through fashion and makeup and DIY projects. And sometimes there would be deeper stuff like learning about different types of spiritualities or learning about social justice issues on YouTube, and all of that stuff. But it really was YouTube and other social media in general were kind of a stepping stone for me when I was younger, as I was sort of breaking out of my cocoon. A friend of mine who grew up in the same environment that I did recently described me that way. They said, "Oh, it just seems like you've shed your cocoon." And I love that image, and I do find that to be true. I quite literally do run around in rainbow butterfly wings a lot. It's kind of my signature thing.
I love it. I'm here for it.
But yeah, so there's that, and but there's also just the sense of I wanted to do the same thing for people behind me who are younger, or even if not younger, still in that world, to see somebody living out their authentic truth. That's not only important for my own healing and resistance, it's also important for people who are coming up behind me who are also breaking out of their cocoons, and just because it just helps to know you're not alone. And there were people who did that for me. And again, a lot of them were just people on social media who will probably never know who I am, will probably never meet. But that is something that I think about a lot, that if I can live the way I am authentically. I'm not just helping me, but I'm also helping the people that are behind me.
Yeah, I'm glad you said that, because I think there's a sense in which, going back to, again, there, the increasing, choir of voices talking about and living in this way, like, we're just like, it stops here. Like, there's not going to be another generation after us that has to feel like nobody knows what's going on, and B, like, if you want to get out of that, well, here are your people over here that will, take care of you as best we can. And I mean, that, to me, that's part of what's dragged me out of thinking, hey, I'm going to just go get another job after I lost the one that I had, to, well, maybe I'm not. Maybe I'm going to, like, find a way to actually make this the work, because this is what I care about.
Yes.
This is clearly what you care about. And it's like, well, why does this have to be a side hustle? Why? So yeah, I'm going to try to figure out how to make that happen. But in the meantime, let's jump into kind of the heart of the conversation. And I have wanted to, for a few months now, figure out a way to have specifically the religious trauma conversations and the purity culture conversations in this space that I've created, because, a lot of people still don't completely understand what I mean when I say, oh, I had religious trauma. I have religious trauma that I'm still working through. There's a lot of shadow work that is ongoing, and there doesn't seem to be, like, any end in sight. Not that I care about that anymore. Like, I know that that's reality, and because I now, I feel like I have the tools to work through it. But yeah, there's so many people who just have no idea what I mean when I say that. And I figured it would be better for me to get a bunch of people together to tell their stories than to try to just tell my own. So yeah, like, wherever you want to start, jump in.
I love that idea of that chorus of voices. It does kind of remind me of the great cloud of witnesses in Hebrews.
A little bit.
Yeah. Can you tell that I was a children's pastor for a while?
I mean, it wasn't something that was definitely on my mind, but as soon as you said it, I'm like, yeah, that tracks. That tracks.
Yeah. But yeah, so I grew up in a fundamentalist Christianity corner that was pretty tied up in the religious right and purity culture, and especially in my case, a lot of end times stuff, and also the religious authoritarian parenting. I think it's really interesting. There's been a lot of observations recently, and I think this is very solid, that evangelicalism isn't so much a super definable movement so much as it is a movement of product and books. And there are a lot of books that were
yeah. Like, I mean, there were whole bookstores dedicated just to addressing that market.
Yeah.
I mean, we had three of them within not that much distance locally.
Yes.
So yeah, I know. And then the churches themselves have the bookstore inside the church. That was my situation for several years. Like, oh, you didn't even have to leave church. You could go.
You don't have to leave church. I was a church librarian at a couple of different evangelical churches in my time, and so even if you didn't even have to buy the books, they just had the books.
Yeah, I never would have pegged you as a librarian.
Never.
Ever.
No. But yeah. So everything that it looks like I am, I probably am or was. But yeah, so I grew up in this specifically. I grew up in a small, basically, it was a corner of fundamentalist Baptist, very dispensational.
Okay.
So very, basically what that meant was, without the big theology word, was it was the end times are going to happen very soon, and Jesus is coming back, and we've got to really separate ourselves from the world, and that means being just so excessive when it comes to rules about sexuality, rules about what we read, what we watch, and just and even just like fun things. My parents grew up, they couldn't play cards, and while I was allowed to play cards, there were a lot of things that were, if not fully off the table, deeply rooted in shame, because everyone was afraid of going to hell. And hell was this just ever-present thing. And in the tradition I grew up in, there really wasn't, no one was really safe from that. I know some Christian traditions, because babies are baptized in those traditions, there's sort of this sense of like, oh, the baby, that, you know, there's less hell fear. Whereas in the type of Baptist I grew up in, they had this nebulous idea called the age of accountability. And basically what that meant was, as soon as you are able to understand what hell is, if you do not pray the prayer right, you are going there.
So just to like, I learned probably before the age accountability what the age of accountability was.
Yes.
And there was no age. It was just
there was no age.
It's like everybody, you cross over and you don't know you're and
you don't know.
I was terrified for years because I wasn't baptized yet because I was terrified of going to the front of the church. So like it was all everything was terror driven, and so I'm like, every time there's an altar call, I'm like, oh my God, am I past it? If we have a car wreck, is this the day? Like,
yes,
like, and yeah, like it's as I'm placing myself back in that little kid's body, just sitting here talking about it, like,
yeah,
it's terrifying.
Yes, my earliest memories have to do with hell, and
wow.
So it's very. And I was a very anxious kid, and I didn't really know why. And people kept telling me to not worry, but then also they were telling me like I was just going to burn forever in hell. So it's kind of, and also Jesus is going to come back and the tribulation's going to happen and the world is going to burn. My nesting partner and I have this running joke because we grew up the same way. And on the show Parks and Rec, there's that episode where the cult comes into town and they think it's the end times. And they talk about their deity Zorp, and they just very gleefully say, oh, Zorp is coming back and he's going to burn your face off. And my nesting partner and I laugh about that a lot because that was sort of the glee that we would hear growing up from leaders at, Jesus is coming back and he's going to burn the whole world and it's a good thing.
Yeah. Like, oh my goodness.
Yeah.
Oh my goodness. Like, because you're wrong. You're not wrong. Like it's like, I'm thinking back to, sitting in some, and whether it was like humorous or like glorious, like I remember, my first, pastor that I actually paid attention to as a young adult, like he was, one of the great grandfathers of the Southern Baptist Convention.
Oh.
Like he was the president like 3 times or something. And, just these big, he did this whole ridiculously like several month long Revelation sermon series. And yeah, like he wasn't pulling any punches when he was talking about what's going to happen to everybody that's not us.
Yes. I grew up the first church that I was a part of, like in those early years, I grew up in a General Association of Regular Baptist Church, and the Garb is a splinter group that basically they are so fundamentalist that they are not in the Baptist chapter of the Handbook of Denominations, which is an encyclopedic. And that was one of my first clues. I was in college when I found that out, and I went, "Why aren't we in the Baptist section?" I went, "Oh, we're in the fundamentalist section. Interesting." Because like I didn't grow up in churches where like skirt wearing was required. So I sort of had this mindset that like, well, we're not as conservative as the Duggars. We love the Duggars, but we're not as conservative as they are. So everything's fine. This is fine.
Wow. Oh my goodness. Like, just, I mean, just what age were you when you were having that conversation with yourself?
Well, there were multiple conversations with myself. So I remember an early one that happened was I was being informed at a very young age that Mormons and Jehovah's Witnesses were cults. So that was a conversation. And and occasionally we would get literature from the local Mormons and Jehovah's Witnesses group. You know, they would bring literature and leave it at our house. And I would look at it and I would go, okay, I understand that these people they're in a cult. And then I looked at a lot of the stuff that they were talking about in the literature, and I was like, this is extremely close to what I hear growing up. So like, if they're, and I just cognitive dissonance, stuff it down. And there were so many little moments like that. But again, you know, I was a kid in the woods on a religious compound. So I just couldn't, you know, it wasn't really an option to think about it. And then I went to college at a slightly more liberal Bible college in the Reformed tradition. And I met my now nesting partner who grew up the same way I did in a different city. And we were talking about, we both had a lot of questions. And yeah, that it was a process.
So it strikes me as a little bit crazy that you were as kind of locked down as you were, but they let you go to college.
I know. I don't know how that worked. The thought process, I had a very unusual situation because I was an only child, which was very unusual in this community. And I had a family. Yeah. And I had a family. My mom actually worked. She was a career woman. And because my parents were very financially conscious, they were concerned, again, I was an only child. And so they wanted to make sure that there was sort of this like excessive Protestant work ethic, if that makes sense.
Okay. Yeah.
Where it was like, you know, Kandi really needs to go to college. And specifically, I went to college and got some scholarships through some evangelical organizations because I was supposed to go into Christian publishing, which I did. That is how I started my career. That's a whole other story. But so I became what I was supposed to. I was supposed to be this world changer that went into Christian publishing and did all of that. And I did that for a while, but then I asked too many questions and I was a little bit too gay.
Yeah. That stuff tends to get in the way of those careers, doesn't it?
It does, yeah. And I was very much the type of queer person who I was a super aggressive ally, and I was like, we should have LGBTQ people talk about their experience in church. And I was, you know, in the stuff I was acquiring, and people were just giving me so much resistance, and I couldn't figure out why I cared so much. And then you know, finally the like rainbow dawned, and I was like, oh, the aggressive ally to actually a queer person.
Yeah. Yeah, I keep running into these pipelines.
Yeah.
Because we just did an episode for Hannah's podcast where
Yes.
I was the guest.
Yes.
And it was the ex-evangelical to witchcraft pipeline.
It's such a pipeline.
and I had this image popping in my mind of like me as like a Super Mario character, like, but somehow dressed as whatever an evangelical Christian, and I go down the little pipe in the Mario Brothers game. I come out the other side a witch, and now there's talk of T-shirts and like,
I mean,
it's become a whole thing.
Magnificent T-shirt.
Yeah, so we can do a whole line of pipeline T-shirts. This is what you thought I was, and this is what you didn't want me to be.
Yes. And I think too, in talking about pipelines and also all of this, when I talk about these systems and even the people that were in charge of the systems that I was directly impacted by and a part of, I think it's important to note, like, I'm always going after the systems more than the people and the bad ideas, because again, I know that a lot of people, I know myself, I'll say this for me, when I was still in it, when I was still in that world, I would hear stories like my own, and I would get really triggered, and I would have a lot of feelings about, well, are you attacking me? And like, what does this mean? And I don't mean to attack the people. What I mean to say is there are systems in place that are harmful to people, and we can do better. We can dream of a better world. And a better world doesn't mean that we're all atheists and gay or anything like that.
Right.
It just means we're all together taking care of each other. And if God is who God says God is in the Bible, then I should think we would all be excited about a vision that might involve imploding some structures that aren't working well, because we as humans make those structures, we can remake them. And that is a beautiful vocation and task that we have together. So when I talk about these things, I don't really pull any punches for how harmful what these systems were to me and to others. I think that would be a disservice and would be dishonest. But I will say that I know that the people involved, so many of them are just doing their best and trying to cope in a very, very shitty world sometimes. And it's not always easy to find a community to belong in. And sometimes you end up in a place that is super unsafe just because you thought it was a place that would give you what you needed instead of finding community elsewhere as your true self. But I just wanted to add that disclaimer.
Yeah, no, that's very, very good, because I feel the same way. Like, as I go further down this path and I just get older and wiser, I guess, it gets increasingly hard for me to get angry at people for being what their environment geared them to be.
Yes.
Because I think back to before, I spent most of my life up until about age 30 in about 100 to 150 mile radius circle. That was all I knew, was basically, West Tennessee, North Mississippi, a little bit of Alabama, and then we would go on vacation, but that meant going another state away. It wasn't like we went. And so then I started traveling all over creation and meeting all these people and everything, and realizing that a lot of the stuff that I was told growing up is just fucking wrong.
Yes.
It is a completely made up story, and a lot of all the people I was told are terrible are actually wonderful people. Mm-hmm. And why did I believe all that though? Yeah. Because it was all I knew.
Yeah.
And again, I was growing up, the internet didn't really have information like this until honestly not that long ago. I was on the internet, but there was nobody helping me understand. If you searched on whatever it was we searched with for Christianity, you got something, and you never knew what you were going to get. But there wasn't it was all church related. It was there was no I want the intersection of this and this. I want to know about the things that, nobody was even talking about that stuff in public yet. So it's if you were spiritual, you were either some form of Christianity, or you were one of the evil, bad, devil worshipping, cult, whatever, all the other things that are just terrible, and sex and drugs and rock and roll and all that, over there.
Yes.
And so of course I believed what I was told.
Yeah.
Because the people who were telling me were also the people who were taking care of me and feeding me and keeping me safe and yada, yada, yada. And it's okay, then you get out of that environment. And it's okay, well, you told me what my identity was. You told me what my purpose was. You told me who my people were. You told me what my place was. And all of a sudden, all of that's gone. And you're oh, that's scary.
Yeah. Yes. I think too, one of the things that I loved when the Shiny Happy People documentary came out was how they talked about how often cults exist in plain sight. And I think it's important to remember that none of this exists in a vacuum. Like you talked about, it's often the people that our communities, that the people that are taking care of us. And like I talk about how locked down things were, but there were also moments of joy and interesting idiosyncrasies about what was allowed in my house versus what was allowed in another house. And so whatever your normal is, it's going to be different for everybody. And so that can make it really sticky and challenging to figure out like, oh, wait a minute, this is a high control group. Like, because it's like, well, they let me listen to Queen, so it must be fine.
Oh my goodness. Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
That's hilarious. Did they let you listen to Queen?
They did. Yes. Very early. One of my caregivers was very into 70s rock. And I realized that is so ironic, especially since Freddie Mercury is like a bicon. And I did grow up to be a bi person. But like, it's just such an early formative memory for me. So Hell and Freddie Mercury, a big part of my early years.
Hell and Freddie, the universe knew. The universe knew. Just
new.
Like just letting you know early on. See, I'm here. I got you. It'll be all right. Just wait.
It'll be all right. Just keep singing "We Will Rock You," and you will get out of this.
There you go. Oh man. So what? So you're living all this, and then you're starting to have these conversations with yourself about like what was the. When did you realize, okay, I'm a trauma victim?
Yeah, that is a really good question. It was a very gradual unfolding. There was so much stigma, not just in my community, but in general, in the world around me, around mental health and even the word trauma. So a little bit of context here. I am a adult survivor of childhood sexual abuse, and I didn't have words for what had happened to me, really. And so it just was pushed down. When I got into college, I started to notice that I was having all these health issues, and I was just having what I now understand to be panic attacks. I was having them earlier than college, but I was starting to be able, because I was taking classes, starting to be able to be like, wait a minute.
Wait
a minute. And then what ended up happening was I got some of my first jobs, my ministry jobs. I worked part-time in Christian publishing, and I also worked part-time as a children's pastor. And I was just about to get married to my nesting partner. We didn't use the term nesting partner back then, but it was.
Do you mind, since you've said nesting partner about 8 times?
Yeah, no. So nesting partner is a term from polyamory. So I'm a polyamorous person. Yeah. So nesting partner is the partner that I live with.
Got it.
Yeah.
Totally understand.
Yes. So, but yes, I should have defined that sooner. But at the time, we were just good Christian children who met at Bible college and were engaged.
Okay.
So at that time, and so what ended up happening was we got married, and once we got married, I, for the first time, was living like on my own, and my health got even worse, and I started getting migraines, and I started noticing more panic attacks, and it was like my body was saying, hi, so we're in a different environment now. We need to talk about some of your trauma, and especially related to the assaults, but also related to all of the religious stuff. So what ended up happening was I was finding it hard to work. Like I was dealing with so much mental health stuff and all of the physical ramifications of that. And I was slowly piecing together what was happening. And so I went into therapy. In early 2019, I finally had my own health insurance. I had a full-time job in Christian publishing at that point. And that was the time where I was like, I'm going to do this. I'm going to go to therapy, because I didn't like who I was becoming. I didn't like the fact that I was struggling to function in these jobs and roles that I loved. I didn't like the kind of partner I was, and I was seeing myself repeat some generational patterns that I never wanted to repeat. I wasn't handling my emotions well at all. And so I went into therapy, and basically it just took, probably one of the biggest factors was having a very patient partner, but also having a therapist who very gradually would introduce me to a broader world, but also validating my experience. And also like just telling me, sometimes I would say things like, well, this is a sin, and I know this is a sin. At the time it was a Christian therapist, which is what I needed. And she would say, well, have you thought that maybe, like, one thing that I thought was a sin at the time, I thought that tantrums were a sin. Like, that was what I had been told. And my therapist, who was a lovely Christian social worker, was like, well, what if tantrums weren't a sin? And I'm like, well, that would be interesting, wouldn't it? And so, and learning about feelings and what they are and that they're not sin. Again, noticing a pattern here. I was very much to survive, I became the very good Christian girl. I was her. I was a youth leader. I was the lead singer in the praise band. I taught Sunday school. I was the children's pastor in the church library.
You were the girl that they're making the movies about. And the character that is the perfect one that she's never gonna.
Yeah, and that was part of why I was allowed to go to college, because I was never gonna,
Right, you were safe. You were a sure thing.
And the other piece of that was there was this other part of me, which I now understand to be both queerness and neurodivergence. I was very quirky, and I was very open-minded for that community. Like, I was always doing creative stuff and just just very open to things as much as I could. And people would come to me with their scariest questions and their things they couldn't tell their pastor. And that just kept happening because I think they were reading the fact that I was queer and neurodivergent, and maybe they also were queer and neurodivergent, and people were coming to me. And then, as you might imagine, when I came out with what was actually true within me, people stopped coming to me for that kind of stuff. So I was the good Christian girl, but that was a surviving mechanism that, I was trying to survive and connect to God and caregivers in a way that made sense. But no, I was hiding deep down under there.
So you tell me, but this feels like a good time to start talking about resistance.
Yes. What I would say is that from the time I was very, very young, I had very deep questions and doubts, but I felt that for a variety of reasons, many of them safety, I couldn't actually explore them. And I think my body sort of pushed them back without even telling me, if that makes sense. Don't think about this because you got to eat. I think with resisting, I look back at the ways that I was creative. And I even remember early in my life pushing back when someone would come down really hard on a rule. I had someone in my life who vehemently believed that contemporary Christian music was a sin because of the drums. And I remember pushing up against that. And on a more serious note, this person also believed that a white person marrying a black person was a sin. And I pushed back real hard on that. I remember I was 8 years old, and I cannot believe I had the moxie to go up to an adult and say, no, that is wrong.
Wow.
And so what ended up happening, though, so I resisted a lot when I was younger because kids don't have filters, and they're kind of magnificent about that. Kids are great at resisting.
It's true. It's very true.
I think that went dormant when I got into high school. And I've heard a lot of people had similar experiences where there was sort of a radicalization right before they went to college, where there was in high school, I'm going to be on fire for Christ and on fire for all of this. Yeah. And then as I experienced and met more people and my world expanded, that whimsy that was inside of me couldn't be tamed because I was seeing the beauty and whimsy of other people. And that again, coming back to resistance, is being ourselves in all of the whimsical, weird ways that humans can be, is resistance, because you are shining a light, which I guess is sort of a pun back to letting your light shine a little bit. But
works for me.
Yeah, but you are, it might sound cheesy, but you are shining a light, and that is resistance right there.
The roles of the people who did this, because cheesy to me anymore. It's just not useful.
Say sounds.
I was very often told, even as an adult, what was okay to wear, how it was okay to have your hair, how it was okay to do this, how it was okay to do that, places that you were allowed to be seen, places you were not allowed to be seen, unless you had like an alibi that you were there witnessing to somebody or whatever. And I didn't realize it when it was happening, but basically I was like, oh, all the things that I like and want to do now that I'm an adult and can like do what I want.
Yeah.
I'm pushing all of those away so that I can be this, whatever the stereotype of a young married Christian man was supposed to be.
Yeah.
And like, yeah, I very happily do not that almost every day. And, you know, especially anytime I walk outside the house, because it's like, no, you don't get to call those shots anymore. You don't get to make those decisions anymore. You never should have been.
Yeah.
But, you know, I'm at least now taking that power back and putting it where it belongs.
Mm-hmm. I love that for you, and just anyone who is living authentically. I think one of the biggest values that ironically was instilled in me growing up the kind of Baptist I was is autonomy. I was a Baptist raised in the woods. So we were very independent thinking and and I carried that with me, that value. And I think can be a really healthy value, because it's the idea that we as individuals do have a say in our spirituality and the very essence of who we are, including our self-expression. And I think that is something so valuable because if we are all living in true autonomy, that's going to make the world a better place. A, just because people are seeing it modeled, but B, because we're living as our true selves, which means we will behave in a way that is kinder and gentler with ourselves and others. We have more brain space to actually like take care of each other.
Yes, I knew, I was like, I hope this is where she's going. I hope this is where she's going, because like, I don't know when it was that I realized this, but if you are like self-actualizing, like if you are living to the highest potential of who you can be, and if everybody's doing that, then that means that, like, well, if you're the best, like, you're going to be a really kind, wonderful. We're all going to be really kind, wonderful, accepting people to be around. But if you're not, if you're at the other end of that hierarchy of needs, if you will, like, you're going to be very defensive and protective and paranoid and desperate and all the things that we don't want to be and that cause mental and physical. It's like, oh, so what you're saying is, if people just, you know, have their needs met and do what they want, they're going to be a lot happier than if, like, we basically, you know, once we're, you know, old enough to earn our own money, we go get on a hamster wheel and we just keep running until we die.
Yeah. And that is the lie of capitalism, that is the good life, that we work at something maybe that we don't love to give profit to a few at the top. And the fact of the matter is, I think that there is such a resistance to all unjust systems, not just capitalism, in being ourselves and existing as ourselves, because then we can make better systems. Right.
And to me, that's the crux of so much of this, is that, yes, the systems are causing all of these problems, but they're also beneficial to people who don't want them torn down.
Yeah.
And it's not just the people at the top either. It's the people who think the system has been benefiting them all this time.
Yes.
And they're starting to find out that, you know, either A, some people don't believe that and they're going to try to take my system away, or B, they're coming to their senses and saying, oh shit, I've been lied to all this time. And so they're angry. But
Yes.
in sometimes that anger actually, because you're like not sure of what's going on, you actually cling tighter to the
Yes.
thing that you're
Yes.
being told is,
Yes.
you're being told that the thing that's abusing you is, oh, don't let, no, you can't take it away, it's mine.
Yes. I have a joke that early 2018 Kandi was in the death throes of that, with the grabbing really tightly, and I was
Okay.
because I was really scared. And so early 2018 Kandi was not a pleasant person to be around. And that, yeah, and you're meeting 2024 Kandi, who I am who I am because of the work that 2018 Kandi did.
And I think that's important that you point out that time frame. Like,
Yeah.
you don't get better from, like, you don't like get out of church and like you're better.
No.
Like this is a years long journey. Like, I want to say that I'm not that much. I don't know if I'm pretty sure that I started a little bit before you, but not that long. Not that long. And only really started confronting the idea of spirituality again a couple of years ago. And only in the last 6 to 8 months have I really, like, I think I know what my spirituality is.
Okay.
Like, I think I know where I'm at. Like, I think I'm not done, but it's like, it's like it took, it's it's a long time.
Yes.
And we were talking the other, and again, I'm all over the place right now. There's a conversation about like stages of grief actually not being a thing.
Yeah.
And I think it's in much the same way as a lot of, like, it's not that they're not a thing, it's that it's not a start to finish and you're done.
Yeah.
Like, it's more of a spiral upward. And you're going around, at the bottom of the spiral, it's much bigger. So like, you feel like you're not making any progress.
Yes.
Until all of a sudden you start making a lot of progress. But those first years, they're not fun.
And it really, for me at least, it felt like, and I had felt this in the years before 2018, but 2018 was sort of that moment where I realized, oh, I think this change is happening. Like, I'm starting to leave, and like I could feel, and it felt like being on a precipice. And because of all the like slippery slope fallacies I had heard growing up as a scare tactic, it was like, oh, what's going to happen to me? And I am really thankful that I had a partner with me at the time who was doing the same thing, just in a different order. I remember, and I've talked publicly about this before, so I know he would be comfortable with me saying this. I remember he came to me pretty early in the relationship and was like, I don't really know what I believe about hell. And I was like, oh, I have feelings about that, because I was still very, and
sure.
But I remember saying, it was an early decision in my life where I was like, I love this person and I also have questions. So let's just walk through this together. And like, in the same way, Kevin held everything for me too. He knew all of the deep questions I had. And so we were just sort of like holding hands as we like walked into this abyss together. And it turned out the abyss was actually this beautiful meadow of free thought and growth.
Well, that's beautiful, to be honest. Like, I'm so happy that you did not walk that path alone.
Yeah.
It's not fun.
It isn't.
And like, it, you start walking it long before, as you said, before you're walking it.
Yeah.
And that was many years actually for me.
Yes.
Like, I would say I probably walked the path for 6 years before I knew I was on it.
Yeah.
And then it's like, there's you have a moment that kind of like, the tower card, like everything.
Yes.
and you're not the same on the other side of it, but you're also still not done.
Yeah.
Like, you're actually starting again.
Yes.
But now you're conscious of it. And then it gets really interesting.
Yeah.
And then for me, it became like, okay, spirituality just feels gross right now.
Yeah.
We're just not going to do spirituality
Mm-hmm.
at all.
Yeah.
It just was gone for like several years until, yeah, this isn't working.
Yeah.
But then it's like, but what do I do?
Yeah. I think that is one reason I started all the threads, because I wanted to have a space to talk about that spirituality doesn't have to look one way, and that you can find that sense of ritual and community and connection to something bigger, even from a very secular perspective. There is beauty and connection to be found in the most mundane of things. And that is what I held on to throughout my entire spiritual journey, including the cult years. But also that is something, because I wanted, when I started my newsletter, I wanted it to be a place where ex-evangelicals, especially, since that was the group I felt most comfortable talking to, because that was my experience.
Right.
But ex-evangelicals, it's a range of different people. Some folks stay very firmly in the church. Some, maybe end up in a more like LGBTQ friendly denomination or something like that. Some folks end up very witchy. Some folks end up a combination of those. Some folks end up more atheist. And for me, like, I don't know what my label is anymore. It shifts so much. And I have just gotten comfortable with the fact that every day it's different. And it's just me. This is my experience and my journey.
Yeah, I think I feel very much the same way. Like, that's, definitely one of the things that drew me into reading your content was it's like, oh, well, this is like just a bunch of ideas of things that you can do and what they mean to me and what that you might get out of it, and no pressure, just here's some stuff to try. And yeah, like the idea that you don't have to go find a spirituality on the shelf somewhere and adopt it. Like, oh no, you can literally you can just make it up.
You can. And I think that is part of what drew me into witchy stuff specifically, because it is a path that is so infinitely customizable.
Right.
And that's why I wrote the book that I did. My book is called Disabled Witchcraft. It comes out next month. And it's a book about, the subtitle is 90 Rituals for Limited Spoon Practitioners. So the idea is it's these very flexible rituals that anybody can do. And I mentioned spoon in the title. Are you familiar with spoon theory?
I am familiar with spoons, but let's talk about it.
Yeah. Okay. So as a disabled person, the spoons metaphor is something I use all the time. And basically the idea is that at the beginning of your day, there is a certain number of metaphorical spoons, and the spoons represent your energy and what you're able to accomplish in a day. Disabled folks have fewer spoons at the beginning of the day. And not only that, but we also exist in this place where tasks that might take an able-bodied person fewer spoons take us more spoons. So if we have 2 spoons and okay, the job today, I need to work and take a shower, we might just be gone with spoons real fast. Whereas someone who is not disabled might still have 10 spoons after going to work and showering.
Right.
And so I designed the book to be a place that was inclusive from a spiritual perspective, but also inclusive from a disabled perspective, allowing for some space, because like even witchcraft, which is a very inclusive path, generally speaking, there is a lot of ableism there, just like in any spiritual path. And I wanted to talk about like, you are welcome here. And also a big piece of that is the financial accessibility piece. There's a lot of commercialization of witchcraft out there. There's a lot of very expensive stuff, and you do not need to spend a lot of money to have a vibrant spiritual life that is meaningful to you.
Indeed. And one of the things that excites me about your book is that, like, yeah, you can be a witch or whatever label you want to pick, and you don't actually have to do all these rituals and spells and whatever. You don't have to do all that stuff. You could you do what you want to do. And if you're tired or out of spoons or whatever the habit, it's okay. You don't have to do anything today. But sometimes you want to, right? Sometimes, like, because I'll find myself in the place of I have nothing left, but I want to connect to source.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Like, how do I do that in my current state? And that's who
Yeah.
you're talking to.
Yes. Yes. And just like the ways that you can do, like for me, a lot of candles are off the table because of my allergies.
Okay.
And so I use like LED candles a lot, and that
Yeah.
can be such a grounding, centering practice. And so I do candle magic a lot, but it's just, I don't do the pretty aesthetic, like it melts down to a certain, like, and those are gorgeous, they're beautiful, but like that is not on the table for me.
Sure. Yeah.
And so, and I talk about that a little bit in the book, but, and I also acknowledge in the book that like I'm coming from my experience, and every disabled experience is different. We are not a monolith.
Right.
So basically saying, please adapt or discard what is not serving you here. That's the whole point of the book. It's very much a throw out what doesn't work. It's just, it's kind of an everything but the kitchen sink and a couple extra spoons for you. There you go.
Yeah. And that's, I mean, that's what this podcast is about. Like what resonates, take what resonates, leave the rest.
Yeah.
Like to me, that is, you're making an offering, right?
Yes.
Here is my gift to give. And you take it or leave it. I hope it helps you, but if you don't, it's going to help somebody else. So we're good. And I love that. Because that's not our experience in the past. Like there's a book that you have to take nobody actually takes you take the word of this person, every word that they say about what every word says. But like you weren't allowed to say, this doesn't work for me.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And I think that kind of ties into something we talked about earlier with like the communities we grew up in were really a part of sort of a very businessy publishing arm kind of thing, where there was a lot of benefit from propping up people as like Christian writers as these like these perfect, untouchable spiritual guides. And something that when I went to, because I got my start in Christian publishing, and as I was starting to write outside of that, but still about spirituality, I really wanted to push back on the idea that I was like this person who like knows shit. I don't. I'm just telling you what I am telling you what I am doing in my life, and it's very much like a canvas of expression more than a like, this is what you should do.
Yeah, that's a tough. That's just tough in, again, you know, given the fact that we're forced to play capitalism.
Yes.
Like there is a system that expects you to sell in a specific way.
Yes.
And and if you don't, say that's not who you are, that system will penalize you.
It will.
and so it's like, okay, well, how much dirt am I going to get on me to get my message out?
Yeah. And I've been really grateful. My publisher, who I work for, I did not work for them when I sold the book to them, but I started working for them afterwards, and they've been really, really great about that. It's a small leftist press, so like it's a good vibe.
Yeah, it'll probably work for you.
Yeah, and I just there's not expectations that this thing is going to sell 1 million copies at all. It's just a little book that I wrote, and it's been a joy to work with it with the team there. And yeah, I don't want to sell 1 million copies necessarily. I want to just exist and be creative and help other people do the same. I am just a queer weirdo who lives in the Midwest, so take it or leave it.
Look, I'm here for it. I'm here for it because I want more people to do that.
Yeah, yes.
Like I don't want what everybody's doing. I don't want to read that. I don't want to watch that. I want the weird stuff. I want the stuff that sticks out or that is, you know, unique for a dozen different reasons, because that's what makes life fun and beautiful and interesting and I think that, just, you know, anything that we can do to like set people free in that way, I'm here for it.
Yeah. I've been loving zines for that reason, just because that subculture is just so like that, where everything's just so weird. And I edit zines for my job, but I also make zines outside of my job. And I love the decentralized nature of them and just how weird they are. And it's fun to when I have visited other cities, it's fun to visit other zine shops and see like what the local scene is. And it's just, just whatever, finding community in those weird creative niches is just an utter joy, and something that I do consider to be deeply spiritual.
Yeah. And at the risk of being that host, for people who aren't familiar with what a zine is.
Yeah. So zines are, Microcosm, the publisher I work for, sometimes calls them bookettes. They're basically short, far less edited booklets that people often self-publish and are passed around, especially in like punk and punk adjacent scenes, but they're very popular in queer spaces. One of my favorite gay bars is it's also a banned book cafe, and there's always zines there, and it's a bunch of zinesters that we all hang out there. And
okay.
So a zine I'm working on right now is a horror poetry collection about leaving a cult, and so I'm using horror imagery to talk about the experience of getting out of it. And
cool.
So like, it's weird shit like that is absolutely not going to be a book that like a publisher's going to pick up, but it's a labor of love. Yeah. And I see, and often, and zines are they're very homemade, and it's a fascinating subculture. There are a lot of people who have taken efforts. There's a lot of zine librarians who have taken efforts to digitize zines so that they are preserved. Zines are also tend to be the front lines of identities that are marginalized. So a lot of like queer conversation. I know in my zine library, I have one that's about queer attachment and stuff. And I gave it to another queer person who was just starting her like coming out journey. I'm like, here, you're starting to date now. Read this queer attachment zine.
Nice.
And so like, I think there is, I love zines for that reason. They're often exchanged with no money. Like it's very anarchist. I don't know. It's just,
no,
I
get it. Like I made, I guess I want to say that the first and probably one of the only zines that I produced, like many moons ago, in the mid 90s, we were at governor's school, like this month-long college-like experience in the summer between like junior and senior year. And ours was the governor's school for the humanities. So we were all the poets and playwrights and philosophers and all of this stuff. And so there were a group of friends that we kind of clicked very early on and stayed together for the whole month. And we basically published our own anthology of our work, just us. But the covers were like basically we're like putting all this random stuff on the copy machine and like making, we called it's copier art.
Yes.
And those were the covers. And that was very much a zine.
Mm-hmm.
And the other place that I've run into it is in my former, still sort of life as a technologist. There are a lot of people who create technology zines to like, especially as like educational content, and they're brilliant because like you're learning this arguably very dry, complicated thing, but in a format that like almost like helps your brain relax a little bit.
A little bit, yes.
Yeah. So I think it's great. Well, where can people get the book?
Yes. So my book is available for pre-order at microcosm.pub/disabled-witch.
Okay.
That's the short link.
Okay. And that's just one word, disabled witch.
Disabled witch.
Okay.
Yeah.
Cool. Yeah. And where else can people find you on the internet?
So I have, it's a link tree basically, but I have a website, and it's kandizeller.com, and my name is spelled Kandi, which I know is unusual, but that is my name. And my last name is spelled Zeller. So kandizeller.com. And then also you can find me on Substack. My newsletter there is called All the Threads. And that's where we talk about weird spiritual practices. It's weird. It always gets weird, but it's fun.
Awesome. Well, this has been everything that I hoped it would be conversation-wise. Thank you so much for sharing your story and just your knowledge and wisdom on all of these things. It's been great.
Thank you. This has been a wonderful conversation. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, it's my pleasure. And our listeners are going to love this as well. So to the listeners, thank you for joining us on this journey. And if you enjoyed today's episode, please consider subscribing. We are on Substack as well, Contemplating Resonance. If you subscribe on Substack, you get the videos and you get all of the written stuff that I do as well. But we're also on Spotify, Apple, all those other places that people get their podcasts. And if you want to help me out, leave a good review on the podcast platform of choice, because basically the way those platforms work is if you don't have any reviews, you don't exist unless people know you exist. So that just helps us bubble up. We have to all bow down to the algorithm, and that's how you help me play algorithm better. So really appreciate that. And then we are on Instagram at contemplating.resonance. So that's the name finally landed on, and we'll be posting stuff there as well. But Substack's the main place that we want you to come hang out. So just look for us there, and look forward to seeing you on another episode of the Contemplating Resonance podcast. So with that, we will say good morning, good evening, and good night to wherever you are in the world, and stay resonant, folks.